I had survived 37 straight rejections, so I knew exactly when the hiring manager was about to cut me loose. But this time, the door flew open. The interviewers jumped to their feet as an old man I only knew from dusty photographs walked in. They called him chairman. He slammed a thick file on the table and announced that instead of rejecting me, we were going to discuss how I could freeze my family's entire cash flow by this afternoon. My name is Natalie Allen, and I am 31 years old. I was currently sitting in a glass box that cost more than my entire college education, trying to convince 3 strangers that I was worth a paycheck. The conference room at Vexton Ridge Analytics was designed to intimidate. It was a suspended aquarium of soundproof glass and brushed steel, hovering on the 42nd floor of a downtown skyscraper. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that I was sure was legally classified as Arctic, a common tactic to keep candidates on edge. I sat with my hands clasped on the polished mahogany table, fighting the urge to rub warmth into my arms. Across from me sat the tribunal. There was the HR director, a woman with glasses so sharp they looked like they could cut skin, the department head of data science, a man who had checked his watch 3 times in 4 minutes, and the investment representative, a guy in a suit that cost $5,000 who looked at me like I was a rounding error in a spreadsheet. They were staring at my resume. I knew exactly where their eyes were fixed. It was the gap, the gaping, infected wound in my employment history that had swallowed the last 14 months of my life. The HR director cleared her throat. The sound was dry, like shuffling paper. "Ms. Allen, we have reviewed your technical assessment," she said, not making eye contact. Her finger traced a line on the paper. "Your SQL proficiency is in the top 1% of our applicant pool. Your predictive modeling case study was, frankly, flawless." I nodded, forcing a polite smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Thank you. I have always taken pride in the precision of my work." However, the investment representative cut in, leaning back in his chair. "There is a pattern here we find concerning. You left Lumencore Metrics abruptly over a year ago. Since then, your history is spotty. Freelance gigs, a few weeks here and there. Nothing sticks." I tightened my grip on my own fingers under the table. I had rehearsed this answer 37 times. This was interview number 38. "I left Lumencore due to a fundamental divergence in ethical standards," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Management requested that I adjust a data set for a client presentation to reflect trends that did not exist. When I refused to alter the raw data, the working environment became untenable. I chose to resign rather than compromise the integrity of the analysis. It was the truth. It was the noble, professional truth, in a movie. The interviewers would nod with respect, impressed by my unwavering moral compass. In the real world, specifically in corporate America, they just exchanged glances. It was the look people give when they smell something rotting but are too polite to point it out. "Integrity is important," the department head said, finally looking up from his phone. "But we are a client-facing firm. Ms. Allen, flexibility is also a virtue. We need people who can find solutions, not problems." I felt the cold in the room seep into my bones. They did not want an analyst. They wanted a rubber stamp, but I could not afford to be righteous. I had $84 in my checking account. My rent was 6 days late. The ominous hum of the refrigerator in my apartment was a reminder that I could not afford to fix it if it died. "I understand," I said, lowering my head slightly, an act of submission that tasted like bile in my throat. "I assure you, I am pragmatic. My priority is delivering actionable insights." The HR director flipped a page in her folder. She frowned. "We ran a standard background check and reached out to the references on file." She said. My stomach dropped. I had listed a former colleague, someone I trusted. "We received some rather unusual feedback," she continued. "The note here says that while you are technically gifted, you have a history of creating, and I quote, team instability." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Another note suggests a tendency to be uncooperative with leadership during critical crunch times," she read, peering over her frames, "and that you struggle to separate personal issues from professional obligations." I sat frozen. That was not my colleague. My colleague would never say that. Those phrases, uncooperative, personal issues, those were specific. They were weaponized. They sounded like the whispers I heard at family dinners, not performance reviews. Who provided that reference, I asked, my voice rising half an octave. I have written recommendations from my direct supervisors at my 2 previous firms before Lumencore. The HR director closed the folder. We protect the anonymity of our sources. Ms. Allen. But when we see a candidate with a year-long gap in feedback warning us about behavioral risks, we have to pause. Vexton Ridge prides itself on a seamless culture fit. There it was, culture fit, the corporate polite way of saying you are damaged goods. I looked at the whiteboard behind them. It was covered in diagrams about synergy and flow. I looked at their faces. They had already made up their minds 10 minutes ago. This entire charade, the water bottle they offered, the polite nodding, it was just protocol. They were never going to hire me. I realized with a terrifying clarity that this was not just bad luck. 37 rejections. 37 times I had walked in qualified and walked out feeling like a criminal. Someone was poisoning the well. I thought of my mother's voice on the phone yesterday, asking if I was done playing career woman yet. I thought of my sister Lauren, asking if I could pick up her kids early because I wasn't doing anything important anyway. The investment representative checked his watch. He placed his hands flat on the table. The universal signal for get out. Ms. Allen, he began, and I braced myself for the script. We appreciate your time coming in today. Your technical skills are impressive. I stopped listening. I watched his lips move. However, moving forward, other candidates. It was a rhythm I knew better than my own heartbeat. But, he said, we feel that at this time, the heavy oak door to the conference room did not open. It was thrown inward with a force that rattled the glass walls. The 3 interviewers jumped. The department head nearly dropped his phone. I spun around in my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. Standing in the doorway was a ghost. At least, that was my first thought. He looked like he had walked out of a history book or a very expensive period piece drama. He was an old man, thin, but standing with the rigidity of a steel beam. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that was impeccably tailored, a style that had gone out of fashion 40 years ago and then come back around as a symbol of old money. He held a polished wooden cane with a silver handle, but he did not lean on it. He held it like a weapon. His hair was silver, swept back, and his eyes were a piercing, icy blue that scanned the room with terrifying intelligence. I had seen this face before. In the dusty, water-damaged photo albums my father kept hidden in the garage, buried under boxes of old tools. This was the face my father had run away from. The investment representative scrambled to his feet so fast his chair tipped over. "Chairman Monroe," he stammered. We were not expecting you." The HR director stood up, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "Sir, what an honor. We are just finishing up an interview." The old man, Walter Monroe, the billionaire recluse who owned the holding company that owned the venture firm that owned Vexton Ridge, ignored them completely. He walked into the room. The sound of his dress shoes on the polished concrete floor was a slow, deliberate rhythm. Click, click, click. He walked past the investors. He walked past the HR director. He walked until he was standing at the head of the table, directly opposite me. He looked at me. For a long, agonizing 10 seconds, he just looked at me. His eyes dissected my cheap blazer, my tired face, the desperate tension in my shoulders. Then, he placed a thick folder on the glass table. It was not a standard manila folder. It was a deep, royal blue, made of heavy cardstock. Embossed on the front in silver letters was a name, Natalie Elaine Allen. My middle name. I never used my middle name on resumes. "Sit down," Walter Monroe said to the room. Though he was looking only at me, his voice was gravel and velvet, quiet but commanding absolute obedience. The 3 interviewers sank back into their chairs, looking terrified. Actually, Walter corrected himself. "No, do not sit down." He turned to the investment representative. "You were about to finish your sentence. You were about to tell Ms. Alan, that despite her being the only person in this room who actually understands the predictive algorithms you sell, you are rejecting her. The man turned pale. Sir, it is a matter of culture fit. We have concerns about... You have concerns because you read a note. Walter cut him off. He tapped the blue folder with a long, bony finger. You read a note that was planted in her file by a third party. You did not do your due diligence. You simply followed the path of least resistance because it is easier to reject a candidate than to investigate a lie. I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. How did he know? How did he know about the note? Walter looked back at me. His expression softened, just a fraction of an inch. I am here, Natalie, he said, using my name as if he had earned the right to witness the 38th time the world tries to push you out of your own future. 38. He knew the exact number. A chill went down my spine, colder than the air conditioning. Who are you? I whispered. Though I knew the name. I needed to know the why. Walter smiled. But it was a grim expression. It was a smile that promised retribution. I am the man who is tired of watching from the sidelines, he said. He turned to the HR director, who looked like she might faint. Get out, Walter said. Excuse me. Sir, leave the room, Walter said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. All three of you, take your notes, take your prejudice, and wait in the hallway. Do not leave the building, just leave this room. But the interview, the investment representative tried to protest. This is no longer an interview, Walter said, placing his hand on the blue folder. He looked at me again, and for the first time, I saw something familiar in those cold eyes. I saw my father's stubbornness. I saw my own anger reflected back at me. This is family business, Walter declared. The three interviewers practically tripped over each other to get to the door. They grabbed their laptops and fled, casting confused, terrified glances back at us. The heavy glass door clicked shut, sealing the two of us inside the suspended aquarium. Silence descended on the room. It was just me, the billionaire stranger, and the blue folder that lay between us like a loaded gun. Walter pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down slowly. He rested his cane against the edge of the table. He did not look like a frail old man anymore. He looked like a judge. You have questions, he said. I took a breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. You are Walter Monroe. I said, my grandfather. I am. He confirmed. My father said you were dead. I said, or that you were dead to him. He never clarified which. Mark was always dramatic. Walter said, dismissing a lifetime of estrangement with a wave of his hand. He preferred the narrative of the struggling underdog. He raised you on that narrative. Poor but proud. We were happy. I said defensively, you were utilized. Walter corrected sharp and immediate. There is a difference. He reached out and flipped open the blue folder. Inside, there were no resumes. There were bank statements. There were emails printed out on high-quality paper. There were photographs of my sister, Lauren, standing in front of her beauty studio. There were medical bills with my mother's name on them. And there was a spreadsheet, a complex, detailed map of money flowing like veins through a body. I looked down at the papers upside down. I saw my name, Natalie Allen, and next to it, a series of dates corresponding to every job interview I had failed in the last year. Why are you here? I asked, my voice trembling. Why now? After 30 years of silence. Because the game was rigged. Natalie, Walter said, I set up a trust, a blind trust for my grandchildren. It had rules, strict rules. I wanted to see if any of my bloodline had the grit to survive without my help. He pointed to the list of rejections. You survived, he said. You did not ask for a dime. You did not call the trust. You drove an old car. You lived in a shoebox apartment, and you kept applying. You kept trying to get through the door. He leaned forward, his eyes burning into mine. But the door was not locked. My dear, it was being held shut from the other side. By who I asked, though the sickness in my gut told me I already knew the answer. Walter turned a page in the file. He spun it around so I could read it. It was an email log, from Denise Keene to HR Director. Lumen Core Metrics. Subject regarding Natalie Allen's mental health status. I stared at the screen capture. My mother? My mother had emailed my old company. And here, Walter said, sliding another paper forward, a transcript of a phone call to the reference checker at the agency I applied to last month. A woman claiming to be your former project manager, warning them about your instability. The number traces back to a cell phone registered to Glow Loft Studio. Lauren. I felt the air leave my lungs. The room spun. They did this, I whispered. My own family. They need you, Walter said, his voice devoid of pity. They need you to be available. They need you to be the safety net. If you get a high-powered job in the city, if you move to the East Coast, if you become independent, who fixes the roof? Who co-signs the loans? Who watches the children while Lauren plays business owner? I stared at the papers. The dates matched perfectly. Every time I got close to an offer, a call was made, an email was sent. They sabotaged me. I said, the words tasting like ash. They clipped your wings so you would stay in the nest and feed them. Walter said, they have been living off your labor and your guilt for a decade. And they have been living off my money for longer than that. Unbeknownst to you. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy fountain pen. He placed it on top of the blue file. I have a clause in the trust. Walter said, it is called the interview clause. It states that if a beneficiary is systematically obstructed from employment by other family members, the board, that is me, can intervene. Intervene how I asked. Walter smiled again. It was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. You are currently the poorest person in your family, Natalie, on paper, but right now, in this room, you have the authority to become the executioner. He tapped the pen. I am not offering you a job. Natalie, I am offering you the controls. Sign this, and we freeze them out. All of them. The stipends you did not know they had, the rent assistance for the studio, the medical coverage, the credit lines. He leaned back. They wanted you to be unemployed so you could serve them. Fine. Let us see how they survive when the servant becomes the master. I looked at the pen. I looked at the evidence of my mother's betrayal. I looked at the 38 rejections that had destroyed my confidence, all engineered by the people who claimed to love me. The cold in the room didn't bother me anymore. I felt a fire starting in the center of my chest. What do I have to do? I asked. Walter Monroe nodded at the blue folder. Read the file, he said, and then, tell me if you are ready to stop being the victim and start being the Monroe I know you are. To understand why the man sitting across from me was handing me a loaded gun in the form of a fountain pen. You have to understand the person I was before the 38 rejections. You have to understand that I was not always a desperate woman in a cheap blazer. 2 years ago, I was a ghost in the machine at Lumen Core Metrics. I was the senior data analyst, and I was making $125,000 a year. I was good at my job. I was exceptional. I could look at a chaotic scatterplot of consumer behavior and see the narrative hidden in the noise. I predicted the fall of 3 major retail chains 6 months before they filed for bankruptcy. My performance reviews were glowing. I was on track for a promotion to director before I turned 32. I had a savings account. I had a 401k. I had a future that looked like a straight, ascending line. But looking back at the file Walter Monroe had placed on the table, I realized that I never truly owned that money. I was merely the custodian of it. The real owners were the people who shared my last name, to the world. I was a successful professional, to my family. I was an endless, renewable resource. I was the logistical backbone of a family that refused to stand up straight. My life was a series of frantic text messages and guilt-laden voicemails. I would be in the middle of building a complex predictive model for a Fortune 500 client, and my phone would buzz. Nat, the printer is broken again. Dad needs to print his return label. Come fix it. Natalie, are you busy? Mom needs a ride to the dermatologist. Her car is making that noise again. Aunt Nat, Mommy says you have to pick us up because she has a meeting. My mother, Denise, had a way of framing these demands as compliments. She would pat my hand with a pitying smile and say that I was just so much better at paperwork than she was, or that I was so much more organized. She made competence sound like a biological obligation. If I could do it, I had to do it. Helping out a little would not kill me, she would say. And then there was Lauren. My sister was 34 years old. She was the owner, founder, and perpetual victim of Glow Loft Studio, a boutique beauty salon that had been on the verge of grand success for 5 years running. Lauren was the dreamer. She was the artist. She was the one who took big risks, which meant I was the one who had to carry the safety net. I loved my nieces. They were 6 and 4 years old, and they were the only pure things in our ecosystem. But even they were weaponized. If I hesitated to drive across town during my lunch break to drop off forgotten gym clothes, Lauren would sigh. She would say that the girls were going to be so disappointed. She would ask if my spreadsheets were really more important than family. So I did it. I always did it. I paid for the new tires on my father's truck because he was short that month. I paid for the roof repair on my parents' house because the insurance claim was too complicated for them to figure out. I bought the groceries for Sunday dinner every single week. I remember the night I got my biggest raise at Lumencore. It was a substantial bump, 15%. I took the family out to dinner at a nice Italian place downtown to celebrate. I wanted to feel proud. I wanted, for just 1 hour, to be the daughter who made it, not the daughter who fixed things. I waited until the appetizers arrived to tell them. I got the promotion. I said, beaming, and the raise, "It is official." My father nodded and said that was good. He went back to his menu. My mother put her fork down. She looked at me, her eyes wide and wet with that instant, manufactured emotion she was so good at. "Oh, Natalie," she said, "that is wonderful." I felt a warmth bloom in my chest. "Thank you, Mom. That is truly a blessing," she continued, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Because Lauren called me this morning in tears. The rent on the studio space is going up again. She was terrified she would have to close down. But with your raise, you could cover the difference for a few months. Right? Just until she gets on her feet. It is fate, really." The warmth in my chest turned into ice. I pulled my hand away. "Mom," I said, my voice tight, "I just got the news an hour ago. I haven't even received the first paycheck." "But you will," Denise said, her voice hardening just a fraction. "And Lauren is your sister. She is under so much stress. You know she is trying to build a legacy. You wouldn't want her to fail over a few $1,000s when you're doing so well. Would you?" The celebration was over before the main course arrived. I paid the check. I always paid the check. And 2 days later, I transferred $3,000 to Lauren's business account. She sent me a text with a heart emoji. She did not say thank you. That was the dynamic. I made the money, and they found new emergencies to fill the space that money occupied. And then, the fire at Lumencore happened. It was not a literal fire. It was a request from the Vice President of Strategy. We were preparing a report for a massive pharmaceutical client. The data was clear. The trend line was flat. The drug was not performing as well as their marketing team claimed. My boss called me into his office. He closed the blinds. He asked me to soften the numbers. He used words like recontextualize and optimize the narrative. He wanted me to exclude the third-quarter data points that drag the average down. I refused. I told him that was fraud. I told him that my name was on the report, and I would not sign off on a lie. I thought I was being a hero. I thought the system would protect me. I filed a report through the internal ethics hotline. I was naive. Within a week, I was isolated. I was left off email chains. My access to the primary servers was revoked for maintenance. I was labeled as difficult. I was told in a meeting that I lacked the flexibility required for senior leadership. They did not fire me. They just made the air in the office so thin I could not breathe. Finally, HR called me in. They offered me a mutual separation agreement, 3 months of severance pay in exchange for my silence and my immediate departure. They called it a clean break. I signed it. I walked out of the building with a box of personal effects and my integrity intact. I thought I would be okay. I had a great resume. I had skills. I would find another job in a month. I was wrong. The moment I lost my job, my family did not offer support. They saw an opportunity. The very next morning, my mother was at my door at 8 o'clock. "Since you are not working now," she said, bustling into my kitchen. "You can finally help me clean out the garage. Dad has been putting it off for years." "Mom," I said, still in my pajamas, feeling the shell shock of unemployment. "I need to update my resume. I need to start applying." "You have plenty of time for that," she dismissed. "You are smart. You will get a job tomorrow. But today, you are free." Free. That was the word they used. Because I was not clocking into an office. My time was suddenly public property. I became the full-time nanny for Lauren's kids, so she could attend networking events that looked suspiciously like brunch with her friends. I became the chauffeur for my father. I became the housekeeper. And the money. The severance check that was supposed to be my lifeline, my survival fund, until I found work. It began to bleed away. 2 weeks after I left Lumencore, Lauren came to my apartment. She did not knock. She had a key. She looked frantic. "The business credit card," she said, pacing around my small living room. "I maxed it out. I bought the new laser equipment because I thought the loan came through. But it didn't. The interest rate is 24%. Nat, if I don't pay the minimum and a chunk of the principal, they are going to send it to collections. It will ruin my credit score." "How much?" I asked, rubbing my temples. "4,000, she said. I choked on my coffee. "Lauren, I am unemployed. I am living on a fixed amount of cash. But you have the severance," she pleaded. "You have that big check. Look, just loan it to me. I have a big bridal party booked for next month. I will pay you back in 30 days. I swear on my life." She cried. She said she was a failure. She said she was going to lose the studio and the kids would starve. I wrote the check. I paid off her credit card. 30 days passed, then 60. I asked for the money back. Lauren got angry. She said I was being insensitive. She said business was slow. She said family should not keep score. I never saw that $4,000 again. 4 months into my unemployment, I realized the local market was drying up. I started looking at jobs in Chicago and Boston. I found a great opening in Boston. It was perfect. I told my mother I was thinking of applying. I expected her to be happy that I was taking initiative. Instead, she burst into tears. "You would leave us," she sobbed, sitting at her kitchen table. "Now. When everything is so hard, Mom. I need a job," I said gently. "There is nothing here. There are plenty of jobs here." She insisted. "You are just being picky. You cannot move to the East Coast. Who will help your father with his therapy appointments? Who will pick up the girls on Tuesdays and Thursdays? You know Lauren is drowning. She needs you. We need you. I am drowning too." "Mom," I said, "you are fine," she snapped, wiping her eyes. "You are strong. You always figure it out. But if you leave, this family falls apart. Is that what you want? Do you want to be the reason your sister loses her business?" The guilt was heavy. Physical weight. It sat on my chest like a stone. I did not apply for the job in Boston. I stayed, and I watched my savings account dwindle to double digits. I stayed, and I let them consume my days with errands and my nights with their crises. And all the while, I was interviewing, I was putting on my suit, driving to offices, shaking hands, and doing my best. And every time, I came home to a rejection email. I started to doubt my own sanity. Was I bad at this? Had I lost my edge? I would sit in my car after a rejection, crying, and my phone would ring. It would be Lauren. "Hey, since you are already downtown for that interview thing, can you pick up my dry cleaning? Thanks. Love you." They did not care that I was failing. In fact, looking back, it seemed like my failure was convenient for them. As long as I was unemployed, I was available. As long as I was desperate, I was compliant. I looked down at the blue folder in the quiet conference room. I looked at the spreadsheet that showed the money flowing from the trust to my father, to my sister. While I was paying for their tires and their debts with my severance money, they were receiving monthly stipends from a grandfather I was told did not exist. They had money. They had always had money. They drained me not because they were poor, but because they were greedy. They drained me because it was easier to spend my money than to touch their own. They drained me because keeping me poor and kept me close. I remembered the look on my mother's face when I told her I had lost my job at Lumencore. I had expected worry, but now, replaying the memory, I realized what I had actually seen. It was relief. She was relieved because she knew that if I wasn't working for a company, I would be working for her. I felt the anger rising up my throat. Hot and bitter, I had sacrificed my career, my financial security, and my self-respect to keep them afloat, and the whole time, they were standing on a yacht, watching me tread water until my muscles gave out. I looked up at Walter Monroe. I remember everything. I said, my voice steady, though my hands were clenched into fists. I remember every single dollar. Good, Walter said. He pointed to the next section of the file. Then you are going to want to see how they made sure you stayed unemployed, because the sabotage did not stop at asking for favors. That was just the beginning. The descent wasn't a sudden drop. It was a slow, suffocating slide. After the initial shock of leaving Lumencore wore off, I treated my unemployment like a project. I woke up at 6 a.m. I showered, I dressed in business casual, sat at my small dining table, and opened my laptop. I was a data scientist. I solved problems for a living. I assumed that my unemployment was just another variable I needed to optimize. I cast a wide net. I applied to boutique consulting firms, massive tech conglomerates, and even mid-tier marketing agencies that needed data cleaning. I swallowed my pride and applied for junior positions, roles that paid 40% less than what I had been making. I told myself it was temporary. I just needed a foothold. The first few rejections were standard form letters. Thank you for your interest. We have decided to pursue other candidates. That was fine. That was statistical noise. The market was tough. But then came the 5th interview. It was with a mid-sized consulting firm on the outskirts of the city. The interview had gone well. We had discussed Python libraries and predictive modeling. The hiring manager was nodding. I felt the familiar hum of a good connection. Then, he looked down at his notes. He frowned, tapping his pen against the desk. So, Natalie, he said, walk me through what you learned from your conflict with management at your last role. I froze. My smile stayed plastered on my face, but my mind raced. Conflict with management, I asked, keeping my voice even. I am not sure I understand. I left Lumencore to pursue new challenges. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. He didn't believe me. Right, he said, dragging the word out. But usually, when there is a note about friction with leadership, it implies a learning opportunity. I just want to know how you handle authority now. I stumbled through an answer about communication and alignment, but the air had left the room. I did not get the job. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Conflict with management. That phrase was specific. It wasn't in my cover letter. It wasn't in my exit interview, which had been officially recorded as a mutual separation due to restructuring. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe the industry was smaller than I thought. Maybe rumors traveled. Then came the 12th interview. It was for a position I was overqualified for by a mile. The HR representative was a young woman who looked like she was barely out of college. She was going through a checklist. Technical skills? Check. She mumbled. Experience? Check. And then she looked up. So, tell me about the conflict with management. How do you ensure you stay on task when you disagree with a directive? The room spun. It was the exact same phrase, identical. It wasn't a rumor. It was a script. Someone was defining my story before I even walked into the room. I needed data. I needed to know what was being said about me when I wasn't there. I called Sarah. Sarah was an old friend from college who worked in HR at a logistics company. She wasn't hiring, but she had access to the back-end systems that HR professionals use to share background checks and reference notes. I need a favor. I told her over the phone, I need you to pull my file, the unofficial one. Natalie, I can't do that, she said. It is a breach of privacy. Please, I begged. I am losing my mind. I have been rejected 12 times. Someone is saying something. I just need to know what it is. She sighed. Give me an hour. An hour later, she called me back. Her voice was quiet. Nat, she said, it is bad. How bad? The official reference from Lumencore checks out, she said. Dates of employment, title, salary, that is all standard. But there is a flagged note in the candidate reliability database. It says, would not rehire. Candidate demonstrated loyalty issues. Loyalty issues. I laughed, a harsh barking sound that startled me. Loyalty issues, I asked. Sarah, I refuse to help them commit fraud. I refuse to falsify data for a client. That is integrity, not a loyalty issue. In the corporate world, sometimes they are the same thing, Sarah said softly, but that is not all. What else? There is a notation from a verbal check, she said. It is recent. It says that a secondary source confirmed a pattern of instability. Who is the secondary source? I demanded. It is anonymous, Sarah said, but the note says the source identified themselves as a family member. The phone felt heavy in my hand. A family member. It says the family member called to express concern about your ability to handle high-pressure environments. Sarah read, they mentioned that you have been struggling with personal commitments and that you tend to leave projects unfinished. I sat on my living room floor, surrounded by unpaid bills and rejection letters. Who would do that? I whispered. I don't know, Sarah said. I'm sorry. Nat, but with a flag like that, most automated systems are filtering you out before a human even reads your resume. You are fighting a ghost. I hung up. I sat there until the sun went down. A family member. I wanted to believe it was a mistake. Maybe an enemy from high school. An ex-boyfriend. But the phrasing was too specific. Struggling with personal commitments. That was my mother's language. That was the way Denise spoke about anyone who didn't do exactly what she wanted. A few nights later, I got my confirmation. I was at my parents' house. I had driven over to fix their Wi-Fi because my father couldn't figure out how to reset the router. I was in the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water, when I heard my mother's voice coming from the sunroom. She was speaking in that hushed, conspiratorial tone she reserved for gossip. No, I know, she was saying. It is just that we are so worried about her. If she moves to the East Coast, she will be all alone. She is fragile right now. I froze, the glass hovering halfway to my mouth. Yes, exactly, she continued. I just told him that she changes her mind a lot. You know how young people are. She gets excited about a job and then she crashes. I just don't want your company to waste resources on someone who isn't ready. My heart hammered against my ribs. She wasn't just gossiping. She was talking to a recruiter. She was actively talking someone out of hiring me. I understand. She said, thank you for listening. Yes, we just want what is best for her. It is better for her to stay close to home until she is stable. She hung up. I heard the soft click of the receiver. I placed my glass in the sink. I walked out the back door, got into my car, and drove away. I didn't fix the Wi-Fi. I drove aimlessly for an hour, screaming inside my own head. My own mother was sabotaging me. And she wasn't doing it out of malice, which almost made it worse. She was doing it out of a twisted, suffocating selfishness that she called love. She wanted me unemployed so I wouldn't leave. She wanted me broken so I would stay. The attacks came from all sides. 2 days later, I received an email from Lauren. The subject line was, "Just thinking about you." Attached was a PDF document. It was a plan, a detailed, unsolicited financial plan for me to sell my apartment. Hey Nat, the email read, I know money is tight right now. I was talking to a realtor friend, and she says the market in your area is peaking. If you sell now, you could pay off your debts and move into the guest room at Mom and Dad's. It would take so much pressure off you. Plus, then you would be closer to help with the girls. Think about it. We are just trying to help you simplify. I stared at the screen. Simplify. That was code for surrender. If I sold my apartment, I would lose my last stronghold of independence. I would be living under my parents' roof, sleeping in my childhood bedroom, dependent on them for shelter while they depended on me for everything else. It was a trap, a beautifully decorated, loving trap. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new spreadsheet. I was a data analyst. If they wanted to make me a project, I would return the favor. I created columns, date, company, Interviewer, name, specific phrasing used. I went back through my emails. I replayed every rejection in my head. Interview 17. The recruiter asked if I had resolved my personal scheduling conflicts. Interview 22. The hiring manager mentioned concerns about geographic commitment. Interview 29. A direct question. Is it true that you are currently managing a family crisis that might impact your hours? I logged it all. The pattern was undeniable. Every time I made it past the initial screening, every time I got close to an offer, someone made a call, someone sent an email, but knowing it and proving it were two different things. I was one person against a faceless system. I suspected Lumencore had altered my personnel file, but I couldn't prove it without a lawyer. And lawyers cost money I didn't have. I was trapped in a loop. I needed a job to get money to stop them from keeping me from getting a job. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I had applied to a small analytics firm called Cedarline. It wasn't a glamorous job. It was back-end data entry and basic SQL maintenance. It was beneath my skill level, but I was desperate. I had nailed the interview. I had references from college professors ready to go. I was sure I had this one. Then, the email arrived. Dear Ms. Allen, thank you for your time. Unfortunately, we have decided not to proceed with your candidacy. It was standard. But then, I noticed something. There was an attachment. The recruiter had replied to a chain of emails and forgotten to remove the internal history. My hands shook as I clicked on the file. It was a thread between the hiring manager and the HR lead. From HR lead to hiring manager. Subject re Natalie Allen candidate profile. She looks great on paper, Mike, but we got a weird ping on the background check, not criminal, but a character flag, from hiring manager to HR lead. What kind of flag? From HR lead to hiring manager. We received an unsolicited email from a concerned party claiming to be the candidate's family. They warned that she has deep-seated commitment issues and is likely to leverage this offer to get a counteroffer elsewhere. They said she is volatile right now. Honestly, it is too much drama. We need someone steady. Let's pass. I read the line again. Commitment issues. Volatile. I looked at the timestamp on the email chain. It was dated yesterday morning. Yesterday morning, I had told Lauren that I had a good feeling about this job. I had told her the name of the company. I sat back in my chair. The apartment was quiet. The hum of the refrigerator sounded like a countdown. I looked at my spreadsheet. Row 37, rejection number 37. It wasn't the economy. It wasn't my skills. It wasn't my gap year. It was them. They were hunting my future. They were actively shooting down every opportunity I created because they needed me to stay wounded. They needed me to be the failure so they could feel like the heroes who were taking care of me, while simultaneously using me to subsidize their lives. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. It was the same feeling I got when a complex dataset finally aligned, and the answer revealed itself. I wasn't fighting for a job anymore. I was fighting a war. I looked at the list of 37 rejections. 37 times they had won, but they had made a mistake. They thought they were burying me. They didn't realize they were just giving me more data. I saved the email. I saved the attachment. I backed up my spreadsheet to an external drive and hid it in a shoebox in my closet. If they wanted to play dirty, I needed leverage. I just didn't know where to find it. And then, the phone rang for interview number 38 at Vexton Ridge. I almost didn't pick up. I almost let it go to voicemail. What was the point? They would just call Vexton Ridge too. They would whisper poison into another ear, and I would be rejected again. But something made me answer. Spite? Maybe. Or maybe it was the data scientist in me, needing to add one more data point to the set to confirm the hypothesis with absolute certainty. I picked up the phone. I scheduled the interview. I put on my suit. I walked into that glass room, and when the investment representative started to say, "We appreciate your time," but I wasn't sad. I was just tired. I was ready to add the number 38 to my list and go home to figure out how to burn my life down and start over where they couldn't find me. I didn't know that the fire was about to walk through the door in a three-piece suit, sitting there in the present, looking at Walter Monroe. I realized that the spreadsheet I had been building in secret wasn't just a list of failures. It was a witness list, and the judge had just walked in. The silence that descended on the conference room after the three executives fled was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a gunshot. The air conditioner hummed, a low mechanical drone that seemed to vibrate against the glass walls. I sat frozen, my hands still gripping the arms of the leather chair, staring at the man who had just walked out of a dusty photograph and into my life. He did not look at me immediately. He looked at the woman who had been standing quietly in the corner, a figure I had barely registered in the chaos of the chairman's entrance. She stepped forward now into the light. She was young, perhaps my age, with sharp features and hair pulled back into a severe, efficient knot. She wore a gray suit that looked tailored to within a millimeter of her life. "Simone," the old man said, his voice calm. "The file. Please." The woman, Simone, placed a black leather briefcase on the table. The sound of the latches snapping open echoed like pistol shots. She pulled out a thick document bound in blue linen and slid it across the polished mahogany until it rested directly in front of me. I looked at the cover. The text was embossed in gold leaf. Northbridge Legacy Trust, Addendum 7C, the interview clause. I looked up at the old man. "Walter Monroe," I said, testing the name on my tongue. It tasted like iron. He leaned back in his chair, resting his hands on the silver head of his cane. "Tell me." "Natalie," he said, "have we ever met? In the flesh?" I shook my head slowly. "No, my father. He kept photos, old ones, black and white Polaroids in a shoebox in the garage. He told me they were from a life he left behind." "And what did Mark tell you about that life?" Walter asked. His eyes were unblinking, 2 chips of blue ice. "He told me you were toxic," I said, deciding that honesty was the only currency that mattered in this room. "He told me the family was obsessed with money. He said you had conditions for everything. He said he left because he wanted to be free. He said we were poor because you cut him off when he chose love over your approval." Walter made a sound that might have been a laugh, but it was dry and devoid of humor. "Free," he repeated. "Is that what he calls it? Living off the labor of his daughter? Using your credit score because he ruined his own?" I flinched. The accuracy of his words stung. "Mark did not leave because I was toxic," Walter said. "He left because I asked him to work. I told him that the trust fund was not a spigot he could turn on whenever he wanted a new car. I told him that if he wanted the Monroe money, he had to contribute to the Monroe legacy. He called that tyranny. He ran away, changed his name to Keene, and spun a fairy tale about the cruel billionaire father to justify his own mediocrity." He gestured to the woman. "This is Simone Keller," Walter said. "She is the legal counsel for the Northbridge Legacy Trust. She is the one who found you." Simone nodded to me. Her expression was professional, but there was a flicker of sympathy in her eyes. "Ms. Allen?" she said. Her voice was clear and precise. "What Mr. Monroe is about to explain is a unique provision within the family trust. It is an archaic mechanism, written 40 years ago, but it is legally binding." Walter tapped the blue folder with his finger. "I knew my children were weak," Walter said bluntly. "I knew they would raise children who were even weaker, entitled, soft, waiting for a handout. So, I wrote a failsafe into the bylaws of the estate. I called it the interview clause." He leaned forward, and for the first time, I saw the intensity of the titan of industry he used to be. "It is a test, Natalie, a test for the 3rd generation." Simone opened the folder to a page marked with a red sticky note. "The clause stipulates that if a direct descendant meets 3 specific criteria, they become eligible for a temporary transfer of executive power," Simone explained, reading from the text. "First, they must have 0 personal debt incurred by luxury spending. Your student loans and modest car payments do not count against you. You have never purchased a boat, a vacation home, or a sports car." I looked down at my scuffed heels. I barely bought coffee. "Second," Simone continued, "the descendant must never have contacted the trust for financial aid. In 31 years, Ms. Alan, you have never sent a letter, made a call, or asked your grandfather for a dime, even when you were evicted from your first apartment, even when your car broke down. You handled it. I didn't know the trust existed. I whispered. Your sister knew. Walter interrupted. Lauren has written me 12 letters in the last 5 years. She asked for seed money for her studio. She asked for a down payment on a house. She asked for a mental health sabbatical in Tuscany. My jaw dropped. Lauren, who cried to me about being broke, had been secretly begging a billionaire for cash. She did not get it. Walter said, because she asked. The Monroe money does not go to beggars. Third, Simone said, raising her voice slightly to regain my attention, and this is the most important condition. The descendant must be actively seeking employment and be rejected at least 35 times due to demonstrable external interference or systemic unfairness. 35. I repeated. You are at 38, Simone said. She pulled out a second document. It was a spreadsheet, far more detailed than the one I had hidden in my shoebox. It had timestamps. It had audio transcripts. We have been monitoring the interference for 6 months. Simone said, we have logs of your mother, Denise, calling hiring managers. We have the email from your former boss at Lumencore, admitting to an associate that he agreed to blackball you as a favor to your father, who claimed you were having a nervous breakdown. My father, I choked out. Dad was involved. Simone slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a bank transfer record. From Northbridge Legacy Trust discretionary stipend, Mark Keene branch, to Mark Keene, amount $5,000, date October 14th. The date was 2 days before my father called Lumencore. Your father receives a monthly stipend, Walter explained. It is a small amount by my standards, but enough to live comfortably without working. He calls it his allowance. When you lost your job at Lumencore, he was worried you would move away. If you moved away, who would drive him to his golf games? Who would fix the house? So, he called your boss. He traded his dignity for your unemployment. I felt sick, physically sick. The room seemed to tilt. All those times my father sat in his armchair, sighing about how hard the economy was, telling me to hang in there. He was the one cutting the safety line. Why, I asked, my voice cracking. Why would they do that? Because you are the engine. Natalie, Walter said softly, you are the only one in that house who knows how to work. If you leave, the machinery of their lives stops. They are parasites, and you are the host. A parasite never lets the host leave the building. He pointed to the glass walls of the interview room. Vexton Ridge is a portfolio company of Northbridge. Walter said, I ordered them to bring you in for an interview. I ordered them to reject you. I stared at him. You rejected me. I needed the 38th rejection to happen in a controlled environment, Walter said. I needed to witness it. I needed to be sure that you would walk into this room, head high, and take the blow one more time without breaking. He looked at me with something that looked like pride. And you did. You sat there and took it. You did not scream. You did not beg. You maintained your dignity in the face of absolute absurdity. Simone closed the file and placed her hand on top of it. Because you have met all 3 criteria. Clause 7C has been activated as of this morning, she said formally. She looked at me. Ms. Allen, effectively immediately, you are not an unemployed data analyst. You are the temporary trustee of the Mark Keene branch of the Northbridge Legacy Trust. I blinked. I don't understand. What does that mean? It means, Walter said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, heavy register, that for the next 24 hours, you have absolute authority over the flow of money to your family. He picked up the fountain pen and held it out to me. Currently, the trust pays for your parents' mortgage. It pays for Lauren's studio rent. It pays for the credit cards they claim they use for emergencies. It pays for the private school tuition for your nieces. It pays for your father's country club membership. I took the pen. It was heavy, warm from his hand. They tell you they are broke, Walter said. They are not broke. They are funded. They spend every cent I give them, and then they come to you for the rest because they are greedy. They want to drain me and they want to drain you. He leaned forward. Tonight, Before the clock strikes midnight, you have a choice. You can sign the authorization to continue the stipends. You can walk out of here, go back to your apartment, and keep living as their servant. They will never know you were here. You can continue to be the dutiful daughter who pays for everything while they laugh at you behind your back. Or, he said, his eyes flashing, you can sign the freeze order. The freeze order, I asked. You can cut them off. Simone clarified. Completely. You can freeze every account associated with the Mark Keene branch. No more mortgage payments, no more rent for Glow Loft, no more credit cards. And the kids, I asked immediately, my nieces. What happens to them? Walter smiled. That is the question I was waiting for. Simone pulled out a separate sheet of paper. If you execute the freeze order, the funds designated for the minor children, your nieces, will be redirected into a protected education and healthcare trust. The parents cannot touch it. The school bills get paid directly. The doctors get paid directly. The money skips the parents and goes straight to the children. So the kids are safe. I said, safer than they are now. Walter agreed. Right now, their mother uses their tuition money to buy laser hair removal machines. If you sign this, the children are protected. But the adults will have to do something they have not done in 20 years. He paused. They will have to pay for their own lives. I looked at the documents. I looked at the spreadsheet that proved my mother had sabotaged my career to keep me as her personal assistant. I looked at the log of my sister begging for money she didn't need while I ate instant noodles to save up for her emergency loans. I thought about the 38 interviews. I thought about the humiliation. I thought about the night I cried in my car because I thought I wasn't good enough, when all along, I was being hunted by the people I loved. They think I am weak. I said quietly. No, Walter said. They know you are strong. That is why they are afraid of you. That is why they had to break your legs, because they knew if you could walk, you would outrun them all. He stood up. He adjusted his cuffs. You have until midnight. Natalie, Simone will stay with you. She has a mobile notary kit. He looked at the door where the executives had fled. Do not worry about Vexton Ridge. You are not going to work here. You are going to own a piece of it one day, if you have the stomach for what comes next. He turned back to me one last time. This is not just about revenge, granddaughter. This is about emancipation. You can save them by enabling them, or you can save them by forcing them to grow up. But you cannot do both. And you certainly cannot save yourself if you are carrying them on your back. He walked to the door. The click, click, click of his shoes was the only sound in the room. The decision is yours, he said. Do not disappoint me. The door closed. I was alone with Simone and the blue file. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3 p.m. 9 hours. I had 9 hours to decide whether to destroy my family's reality or continue to let them destroy mine. Simone sat down across from me. She opened her laptop. I suggest we start by reviewing the full financial breakdown, she said, her tone clinical but supportive. If you are going to cut off the blood supply, you should know exactly which veins you are severing. I opened the folder. The first page was a summary of my sister's spending for the last quarter. Glow Loft studio expenses, $42,000. Itemized decor. Champagne for launch parties. Personal wardrobe listed as uniforms. Loan payments from Natalie Allen to Lauren Keene, $4,000. Status unpaid. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of a tantrum. It was the cold, precise anger of a surgeon picking up a scalpel. Show me everything, I said to Simone. She turned the screen toward me. We sat there as the sun began to set over the city skyline, turning the glass room into a box of orange fire. I read every line. I memorized every betrayal. I saw the vacations they took while telling me they couldn't afford Christmas presents. I saw the gambling debts my father accrued while I was fixing his roof. I realized Walter was right. I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't their sister. I was their insurance policy, and the policy was about to expire. By the time the sun went down, the city lights flickered on below us like a million judging eyes. I knew what I had to do, but I knew it wouldn't be enough to just sign the paper in this room. I needed them to see it. Simone, I said, breaking the silence that had lasted for 2 hours. Yes, Ms. Allen. If I sign this, I said. The freeze happens instantaneously. She confirmed. The cards will decline within seconds. The transfers will stop. The notifications will hit their phones immediately. I nodded. I don't want to sign it here. I said. Simone raised an eyebrow. Where do you want to sign it? I looked at the spreadsheet. I looked at the entry for the emergency loan my mother had guilted me into co-signing last year. I want to go home, I said. My apartment. I have a feeling they are going to come looking for me tonight. Why? Simone asked. Because today is the 15th. I said. The 15th is when the transfer usually hits their account from the trust. But if Walter is here, he probably paused it to get their attention. Simone checked her screen. You are correct. The automatic transfer was suspended at 9 this morning pending the activation of Clause 7C. Then they are panicking, I said, and when they panic, they come to me. I stood up, grabbing the blue folder. Let's go. Simone, I want to be sitting at my own kitchen table when the bill comes due. Simone smiled. A small, sharp smile that told me she liked this part of her job. I will drive, she said. We walked out of the glass room, leaving the ghosts of 38 rejections behind us. I held the pen Walter gave me in my pocket. It felt hot against my leg. Tonight, the interview was over. The performance review was about to begin, and this time, I was the one holding the clipboard. I unlocked the door to my apartment and stepped inside, the familiar smell of stale air and old carpet greeting me. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, chilled luxury of the Vexton Ridge conference room. I placed the heavy blue folder on my cheap laminate dining table. It sat there like a wet stone, dark and ominous under the flickering light of my kitchen fixture. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 8:30 at night. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from Simone Keller. When you are ready to discuss activation, initiate the secure video call. The link is active. I stared at the folder. My hands were trembling, not from cold, but from an adrenaline crash. I pulled out a chair and sat down. I took a deep breath and flipped the cover open. The first page was a flow chart. It was titled, Northbridge Legacy Trust Disbursement Overview. It looked like a tree. At the top was the main corpus of the trust, a massive block of capital managed by Walter. Below it, the money split into 3 main arteries. One went to a charitable foundation, one went to an uncle I had never met living in Zurich, and the third branch was labeled the Mark Keene branch. I followed the line down. It fed into a singular account. Monthly stipend, $12,500. Status active. Duration, 180 months. I did the math in my head instantly. That was $150,000 a year. For 15 years. That was over $2 million that had flowed quietly, steadily, into my parents' bank account while I was growing up. I stared at the number, $12,500 a month. I remembered my father sitting at the kitchen table, head in his hands, groaning that we could not afford to fix the transmission on his truck. I remembered him telling me that I had to take out the maximum student loans because we just don't have the liquidity right now. Sweetheart, I remembered eating generic macaroni and cheese for weeks because money is tight. They were not poor. They were collecting a salary for existing, and they had hoarded every cent of it while watching me drown in debt. And worse, that money had never trickled down to me, not for college. Not for my first car. Not for rent. I felt a wave of nausea. I reached for my laptop and clicked the link Simone had sent me. The screen flared to life. Simone Keller appeared instantly, sitting in a home office with walls lined with books. She looked just as sharp and unruffled as she had in the boardroom. I see you have opened the file, Simone said. Her voice was calm, professional. They have been getting $12,000 a month, I asked, my voice sounding hollow in the empty apartment. Since I was 16, yes, Simone confirmed, plus an annual inflation adjustment. Your father refers to it as his pain and suffering compensation for being cut off from the main fortune. I rubbed my eyes. I need to see the rest. Simone, show me where it went. Simone nodded. I need you to open the digital supplement I just emailed you. It is an encrypted zip file. I opened my email. The file was there. Subject evidence log. Alan Keene. It is password protected, Simone said. To open it, you need to type in the name of the stray cat you fed in your sophomore year of college. The one you mentioned in an email to your ex-boyfriend. I froze. I had never told anyone about Barnaby. I had only written it in one email. Sent from a personal account 6 years ago. How do you have that? I asked. A chill running down my spine. Northbridge security protocols are extensive, Simone said, not apologizing. We have been monitoring your communications for threats for a decade. Walter wanted to ensure no one was extorting you. He was looking for outside enemies. He did not expect the threat to be inside the house. Enter the name. I typed Barnaby. The file unlocked. It wasn't just a list. It was an autopsy of my family's greed. I scrolled through the rows of data. The stipend money came in on the 15th of every month, and by the 20th, it was gone. Withdrawal, Glowloft Studio. Startup capital, $30,000. Withdrawal, Glowloft Studio. Rebranding fee, $15,000. Withdrawal, Denise Keene. Holistics Retreat, $8,000. Withdrawal, Mark Keene. Vintage Golf Club. Restoration, $6,000. It went on and on. They weren't using the money for bills. They were using it to fund their delusions of grandeur. Lauren's failed business ventures. My mother's endless pursuit of expensive wellness fads. My father's hobbies. And then, I saw the entries that made my blood run cold. Loan payment, Rivengate Bank, $750. Loan payment, Rivengate Bank, $750. I frowned. I don't have a loan with Rivengate Bank. I said, I bank with Chase. Simone's face on the screen remained impassive. Scroll to document 4. She said. I clicked on the file. It was a PDF of a loan agreement. Small business expansion loan. Principal amount $80,000. At the bottom of the page was a signature. Natalie Elaine Allen. It was my name. It looked like my handwriting. But I had never seen this document in my life. I never signed this. I whispered. $80,000. I never signed this. We know. Simone said. Look at the timestamp on the notary stamp. January 14th of this year. Where were you on January 14th? I closed my eyes. Thinking back, I was at a final round interview in Chicago. I was physically in another state. Exactly. Simone said. Now, open the video file labeled Rivengate Surveillance. I clicked play. The footage was grainy, taken from a security camera behind a bank teller's counter. I saw my sister, Lauren, standing at the counter. She was laughing. She was wearing a coat that I recognized because I had bought it for her birthday. Standing next to her was a woman I didn't know, the bank teller. Lauren slid a stack of papers across the counter. The teller didn't even look at them. She just flipped to the back page, stamped it, and then they high-fived. Lauren forged your signature. Simone explained. The loan officer is an old high school friend of hers. They bypassed the identity verification protocols. Lauren took out $80,000 in your name to renovate her studio. She put you down as the primary borrower and herself as the co-signer. My stomach dropped. If she defaults on this, Simone finished. The bank comes after you. They garnish your wages. They ruin your credit score. And given that Glowloft has not made a profit in 4 years, a default is mathematically inevitable within 6 months. She stole my identity. I said, the words tasting like acid. My sister committed a felony against me. Yes, Simone said. She did. And your mother knows. We have a text log where Denise tells Lauren to make sure Natalie never sees the mail from Rivengate. I sat back, feeling the room spin. This wasn't just taking advantage of me. This was predation. They were harvesting me. They were using my clean credit history, which I had fought so hard to maintain while unemployed, as a fresh vein to tap, because they had already drained their own. There is one more thing, Simone said softly. The reason you are unemployed. I opened the last file. It was an internal memo from LumenCorp. It was dated 3 days after I was let go. My former boss had written a note to the HR file to justify marking me as do not rehire. Update received call from Denise Keene, mother of the former employee. Conversation duration, 47 minutes. Mother confirmed that Natalie is suffering from an acute behavioral health crisis and is prone to fabrication. Advised that any reference checks should reflect that the separation was due to performance reliability issues, not voluntary resignation. Agreed to update the file to protect the firm from liability. I stared at the screen. 47 minutes. My mother had spent 47 minutes on the phone with my old boss, convincing him to destroy my reputation. Why, I asked. Tears pricking my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of sheer, hot rage. Why would she do that? Read the next line. Simone said, "Note, Mrs. Keene implied that if we provide a neutral or positive reference, Natalie might feel emboldened to sue the company for the original data dispute. She suggested that a negative reference would keep Natalie focused on recovery at home and less litigious. She sold me out. I realized she traded my career to protect my old boss, just so I would stay unemployed and trapped in her house. She made a deal with the people who fired me. I slammed the laptop shut, then immediately opened it again. I felt like I needed to break something. They are monsters, I said. They are people who have never been told no, Simone corrected, and they are people who are terrified of losing their servant. She leaned into the camera. So, Natalie, the question stands. You have seen the map. You see the flows. You see the fraud. She paused. Do you want to be the temporary trustee? I looked at the loan document again. $80,000. If I did nothing, that debt would explode in my face in 6 months. I would be bankrupt. I would never work in finance again. What does it mean? I asked. If I accept, it means you sign the order, Simone said, and we execute a freeze on all discretionary spending for the Mark Keene branch. Define discretionary, I said. Everything that is not a matter of life, death, or basic shelter for the miners. Simone said, the stipend stops. The credit cards linked to the trust are suspended. The payments to Glow Loft cease instantly. What about the mortgage? I asked. My parents' house. That is a gray area, Simone admitted. Technically, shelter is essential. However, under the temporary trustee powers, you can suspend the mortgage payments from the trust, forcing them to pay it from their own savings or the equity they have built up, or you can pay it directly to the bank so they don't lose the house, but give them zero cash in hand. And the kids, I asked, Lauren's daughters, that is the non-negotiable part. Simone said, if you activate the freeze, we trigger the Monroe Nieces Opportunity Fund. It is a separate vehicle. It pays the school directly. It pays the pediatrician directly. It pays for their clothes and food through a controlled debit card that cannot be used at liquor stores, casinos, or beauty salons. So the kids get taken care of. I said, but Lauren? Lauren gets nothing. Lauren gets the dignity of paying her own bills, Simone said dryly, or the consequence of failing to do so. I looked at the clock. It was 10 o'clock. If I do this, I said, my mother, she won't have her spa money. She won't have her retreat money. She will survive, Simone said. Lauren will lose the studio. I said, without the trust covering the rent. She can't keep it open. She is already losing the studio. Natalie, Simone countered, she is just using your credit score to delay the inevitable. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the dark street below. It felt cruel. It felt incredibly, violently cruel to cut them off cold turkey, to watch them wake up tomorrow and realize the magic money tap had run dry. But then I looked at the Rivengate document again. I looked at my forged signature. They didn't care if I ruined my life. They didn't care if I went bankrupt paying for their mistakes. They didn't care if I never worked again. As long as I was there to drive the car and fix the printer. If you don't sign, Simone said quietly, her voice coming from the laptop speakers, the offer expires at 11:59 p.m. What happens then? Then the trust reverts to the status quo, she said. The stipend continues. The fraud continues. And because you looked at the files and did nothing, you become complicit. You lose the right to ever audit this branch again. This is a one-time door. Natalie, Walter wrote it that way. You walk through it tonight, or we weld it shut forever. I turned back to the screen. I thought about the 38 interviews. I thought about the loyalty issues flag. I thought about my mother's 47-minute phone call. They had spent 15 years training me to be their safety net. They had spent the last year actively clipping my wings to keep me in the cage. I am not their safety net, I said, my voice hardening. I am their retirement plan, and I am resigning. I walked back to the table. I picked up the pen Walter had given me. How do I do it? I asked. Simone smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. Go to the last page of the blue folder, she said. There is a document titled Executive Order 7C Alpha Asset Freeze and Reallocation. I flipped to the back. The paper was thick, cream-colored, and terrifying. Sign it, Simone said, and then hold it up to the camera. I looked at the clock. 11:15 p.m. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about my mother crying. I didn't think about Lauren screaming. I thought about the little girl I used to be, the one who believed them when they said we were a team. We weren't a team. We were a heist, and I was the getaway driver who didn't know she was driving a stolen car. I pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed black and permanent. Natalie Elaine Allen. I held the document up to the camera lens. Received. Simone said instantly, the timestamp is logged. 11:17 p.m. She typed something on her keyboard. The freeze is initiated, she said. The banking servers are updating now. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. What happens now? I asked. Now, Simone said. Now we wait. It usually takes about 8 hours for the panic to set in. But since you froze the credit cards... She glanced at a second monitor. Oh, it seems your sister is trying to pay for a late-night dinner at a sushi restaurant right now. I watched Simone's face, declined. Simone said simply, insufficient funds authorized. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Get some sleep. Natalie, Simone said, you are going to need it. They will be at your door by noon. I closed the laptop. I sat in the silence of my apartment. For the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like leverage. I had planned to spend the day sitting in silence, drinking black coffee, and processing the fact that I had just cut my family off from a multi-million-dollar lifeline. I wanted 24 hours to mourn the relationship I was killing before I had to bury the body. But my family, true to form, did not respect timelines. I woke up at 7 a.m. to a barrage of vibrations on my nightstand. My phone was lighting up with the frantic energy of a crisis in progress. The first message was from my mother. Denise. It was a photo of 4 airline tickets fanned out on a table, accompanied by a string of airplane and heart emojis. Surprise. We just could not wait to celebrate your new job. We are boarding now. Landing at 11, Daddy is so excited to see his girl. There was no question mark. There was no request for permission. It was a declaration of invasion. They were coming to collect. I stared at the screen, the sleep clearing from my brain instantly, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. They weren't coming to celebrate. They didn't even know what job I had supposedly gotten, or that I hadn't actually gotten the job at Vexton Ridge in the way they thought. They were coming because the money had stopped. The automatic transfer from the trust usually hit their accounts at 6 a.m. on the 15th. Today was the 16th. The money wasn't there. They were panicked, and like heat-seeking missiles. They were locking onto the only other source of income they knew. Me. Then I saw the message from Lauren. It had come in at 3 a.m, sent presumably while she was packing. It was a screenshot from the Instagram account of a friend of mine, a girl who had visited my apartment once and tagged the location. Lauren had taken that location, cross-referenced it with real estate listings, and circled the estimated market value in bright red markup tool. Zillow says the units in your building go for at least $400,000. Lauren's text read, since you are moving to the East Coast for that big new job, we should list it fast. I just need you to cover the $80,000 gap for me, and then you keep the rest easy. I felt a metallic taste in my mouth. She had already sold my apartment in her head. She had done the math, subtracted her debt from my equity, and decided that my home was actually her liquidity event. I didn't reply. I dialed Simone Keller. She answered on the first ring. They are coming. I said, they are on a plane. I know, Simone replied. Her voice was crisp, the auditory equivalent of a freshly pressed suit. We tracked the credit card purchase for the flights yesterday before the freeze took full effect. It was the last transaction that cleared. They think I'm going to sell my apartment, I said, walking to my window and looking down at the street. They think I'm going to fix the $80,000 loan Lauren forged. Of course they do. Simone said, they are operating on the old firmware. They think you are still Natalie the fixer. What do? I asked. Do I hide? No, Simone said firmly. You do not hide. You stand your ground. Let them hit the wall. The wall. They are running at full speed towards a version of you that no longer exists, Simone explained. The impact is going to be painful, but it is necessary. If you cushion the blow, they will never learn that the wall is real. I hung up. I showered. I dressed not in my usual comfortable weekend clothes, but in the sharp black blazer and tailored trousers I had worn to the Vexton Ridge interview. I put on my shoes. I applied my makeup with precision. I was armoring up at noon. The intercom buzz echoed through my small apartment like a fire alarm. Buzz, buzz, buzz. They weren't just pressing it, they were leaning on it. I walked to the wall unit and pressed the talk button. Natalie. It is Mom. Open up. It is freezing out here. Denise's voice crackled through the speaker, distorted but unmistakably demanding. I took a breath. I am coming down. I said, what? Just buzz us in Lauren's voice cut in. The kids need to pee. I said I am coming down. I repeated. Wait in the lobby. I released the button before they could argue. I grabbed my keys. I grabbed the single white business card Simone had given me the night before. I checked the lock on my door, ensuring it was secure, as if I were protecting my home from burglars rather than my own blood. When the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, the scene in the lobby was chaotic. It was a clash of aesthetics. The lobby of my building was modern, minimalist, and quiet. My family was none of those things. My father, Mark, was standing by the security desk, looking impatient as he tapped his foot. He was dragging a massive suitcase that looked like he planned to move in for a month. My mother, Denise, was wearing a faux fur coat that she thought made her look wealthy, but actually made her look desperate. She was holding 3 different tote bags, and Lauren was there, pushing a double stroller. My 2 nieces were buried in the seats, their faces glowing blue from the iPads they were holding. They weren't looking around. They were sedated by screens, oblivious to the fact that their mother was currently plotting to liquidate their aunt's shelter. Lauren was the first to see me. She didn't say hello. She looked past me, scanning the lobby walls, the marble floors, the high ceilings. Nice building, she said loud enough for the doorman to hear. The HOA fees must be insane, but the resale value holds up. Right, Natalie? Denise shrieked, dropping her bags and rushing toward me with her arms open. My baby. Oh, look at you. You look so corporate. She came at me for the hug. It was a move I knew well. It was the smother hug, the one designed to physically overwhelm me, to force me into the role of the child. I didn't step forward. I didn't raise my arms. I planted my feet and stood perfectly still, my hands clasped in front of me. Denise crashed into me. It was like hugging a statue. She faltered, sensing the lack of reciprocation, and pulled back, her smile wavering. Nat, she said, patting my rigid arm. What is wrong? Aren't you happy to see us? We flew all the way here. I looked at her. I looked at Mark, who had wheeled the suitcase over. I looked at Lauren, who was already typing something on her phone, probably checking the square footage of the lobby. Why are you here? I asked. My voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was flat. It was the voice of a data analyst reading a grim projection. We told you. Denise laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. To celebrate, you got the job, Mark grunted, and to help you pack. If you are moving to the East Coast, you cannot handle all this yourself. We figured we would stay here for a week, help you sort through things, get the place listed. Lauren looked up from her phone. Yeah, she said. I found a realtor who specializes in quick closes. If we list by Friday, we could get a cash offer by Monday. Then you can write me that check for the $80,000, and we are all clear. She said it so casually. Write me that check, as if $80,000 was a lunch tab I had forgotten to pick up. I looked at my sister. She looked tired. Her makeup was heavy, trying to hide the stress lines, but her eyes were hard. She didn't look like a sister. She looked like a predator who was annoyed that the prey was talking back. I am not moving, I said. The three of them froze. What Lauren asked, her brow furrowing. But the job? I am staying in this city, I said, and I am not selling this apartment. Denise's smile dropped completely. But Natalie, she said, her voice taking on that whining, pleading edge, you have to, the plan. Whose plan? I interrupted. Not mine. Lauren stepped forward, abandoning the stroller. She got into my personal space, smelling of expensive perfume and desperation. Look, Nat, she hissed, lowering her voice so the doorman wouldn't hear. Stop playing games. I know you have the money coming, or you will. I need that $80,000. Rivengate sent a notice to the house. They are going to call the loan. I looked at her. I know. I said, You know, she blinked. How do you know? Because I saw the document you forged. I said, the color drained from Lauren's face. It happened instantly, leaving her looking gray and sickly. I didn't forge it, she stammered. You said I could. You said over the phone that one time. I never signed a loan for $80,000. Lauren, I said, cutting through her lie. You had your friend at the bank fake the verification. That is fraud. That is a felony. Mark stepped in, trying to play the peacemaker, which really meant playing the silencer. Now, Natalie, he said, putting a heavy hand on my shoulder. Let's not use words like felony. Sisters help sisters. That is the rule. Lauren was under a lot of pressure. She made a judgment call. A judgment call, I asked, looking at my father. She stole my identity to fund a renovation for a business that loses money every month. It is an investment, Lauren shouted, forgetting to whisper, and you can afford to fix it. You always fix it. Why are you being so difficult? Denise grabbed my hand, trying to squeeze it. Natalie, please, she begged. Just let us go upstairs. We can talk about this over dinner. I will make that pasta you like. We are a family. We only have each other. I pulled my hand away. It felt contaminated. No, I said. No, Mark asked, his eyes narrowing. What do you mean? No, I mean you are not coming upstairs. I said. No one is entering my apartment. This is not a visit. This is an appraisal. You came here to strip mine my life because the trust fund transfer didn't hit your account this morning. The mention of the trust fund hit them like a physical blow. Mark's mouth opened and closed. Denise grasped her pearl necklace. How? How do you know about the transfer? Mark whispered. You didn't think I knew. Did you? I asked. You thought I believed we were poor. You thought I believed that $12,000 a month was just, what, pennies? It is not that much, Mark snapped defensively. After taxes, and the club dues, and the mortgage, it goes fast. You don't understand the cost of living. Natalie, I understand that you have received over $2 million in the last 15 years. I said, and in that same time, you watched me eat ramen noodles and work 3 jobs in college because you said you couldn't help. That was character building, Mark roared, his face turning red. I made you strong. You made me a resource, I shot back, my voice finally rising, echoing off the marble walls. You made me your retirement plan because you were too lazy to work and too greedy to save. Lauren started to cry. It was her go-to weapon. She sobbed loudly, putting her face in her hands. You are so selfish, she wailed. I have kids. Natalie, I have debt. If I don't pay Rivengate, they will take the studio. Then lose the studio, I said coldly. The silence that followed was total. Even the kids looked up from their iPads. Denise stared at me as if I had grown a second head. How can you say that? She whispered. Your sister's dream. Her dream is a nightmare that I'm paying for. I said, and I am done paying. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the business card. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with the Northbridge Legacy Trust logo embossed in navy blue. I held it out to my father. He looked at it, his hands shaking. He recognized the logo. He knew exactly what it meant. "What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling. "There is a meeting," I said. 3 o'clock this afternoon, at the Northbridge Foundation headquarters. "I don't want to go there," Mark said, backing away. "I haven't spoken to him in 30 years. I won't beg him." "You are not going there to beg him," I said. "You are going there to negotiate with me." "With you?" Lauren asked, wiping her mascara-stained cheeks. "I am the one holding the pen now," I said. I took a step back toward the elevator. The distance between us felt like miles. "If you want to discuss the money, be at that address at 3 o'clock, I said. "If you are not there, then the conversation is over." "And Mark?" My father looked up. His eyes filled with a mix of fear and confusion. "Don't bring the suitcase," I said. "You are not staying," Natalie Denise cried out as I pressed the call button for the elevator. "You cannot leave us in the lobby. We are your parents." I watched the elevator doors slide open. I stepped inside. I looked at them one last time. They looked small. They looked messy. They looked like strangers who had mistaken me for someone who cared about their excuses. "I love you," I said, and I meant it. It was a painful, tearing kind of love, but I am not your bank anymore. I hit the button for my floor. As the doors closed, I saw Lauren kick the side of the stroller in frustration. I saw Mark staring at the business card as if it were a grenade. I saw Denise looking around the lobby, realizing that for the first time in her life, her tears had purchased absolutely nothing. The doors shut. The lift began to rise. I leaned my head against the cool metal wall of the elevator. My hands were shaking, but my breathing was steady. I had built the first wall. Now, I had to drop the guillotine. The Northbridge Foundation headquarters was a monolith of gray steel and tinted glass that seemed to swallow the light around it. It stood in the financial district like a silent judge, towering over the surrounding buildings. It was the complete opposite of the cluttered, warm, chaotic suburban house I had grown up in. It was cold. It was precise. It was unforgiving. My family walked into the lobby at exactly 3 o'clock. They looked small. My father, Mark, wore a blazer that was slightly too tight, tugging at the buttons. My mother, Denise, had touched up her makeup, but her eyes were darting around the expansive atrium with a mix of awe and terror. Lauren walked behind them, her arms crossed, her jaw set in a defiant line that tried to mask the tremor in her hands. They looked like tourists who had wandered into a restricted military zone. A security guard, a man the size of a vending machine, escorted them to the private elevator. He did not smile. He did not make small talk. He simply pressed the button for the penthouse floor. I was waiting for them in the main boardroom. Walter Monroe sat at the head of the table. He was perfectly still, his hands resting on the silver head of his cane. I sat to his right. Simone Keller stood near the display screen, a remote in her hand. Near the door, another security guard stood with his hands clasped behind his back, blending into the shadows. When the doors opened and my family stepped in, the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Denise was the first to speak. She stopped dead in her tracks, her handbag slipping from her shoulder to the crook of her elbow. She stared at the old man at the end of the table. "You," she breathed. Her voice was a mixture of recognition and ancient resentment. She turned to my father. "Mark, that is him. That is the man, the one who abandoned us." My father's face went pale. He looked at Walter, then at the floor, then back at Walter. He looked like a child who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar, only to realize the jar belonged to a giant. "Hello? Mark?" Walter said. His voice was not loud, but it carried across the room with effortless authority. "Sit down." They took the seats on the opposite side of the table. The distance between us felt like an ocean. Simone Keller stepped forward. She didn't offer them water. She didn't offer pleasantries. "This is an official session of the Northbridge Legacy Trust," Simone announced. "We are here to review the status of the Mark Keene branch. The current temporary trustee presiding over this branch is Ms. Natalie Allen. Lauren let out a sharp, barking laugh. She leaned back in her chair, rolling her eyes. Trustee, she scoffed. Is this a joke? She is unemployed. She lives in a one-bedroom apartment and drives a Honda. She isn't a trustee of anything. Simone didn't even look at her. She simply picked up the original copy of Addendum 7C and placed it in the center of the table. The heavy paper made a dull thud. Ms. Allen has met the criteria for the interview clause, Simone said calmly. Specifically, she has endured 38 failed interviews due to proven external interference. Interference, Mark asked. Finding his voice. What are you talking about? Nobody interfered. The job market is just tough. We have been nothing but supportive. Simone pressed a button on the remote. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. A waveform audio file appeared. Exhibit A. Simone said, a phone call recorded on October 14th. The duration is 47 minutes. The participants are Denise Keene and Mr. Robert Vance, the department head at Lumen Core Metrics. My mother froze. Her hand went to her throat. No, she whispered. Simone hit play. The sound quality was crystal clear. My mother's voice filled the room, amplified by the surround sound system. Look, Robert, I know Natalie is good at numbers, my mother's recorded voice said. But she is fragile right now. If she moves to the East Coast for that Boston job, she will collapse. We just want to keep her close to home where she is safe. There was a pause on the recording. Then Robert's voice. So what are you asking me to do? Denise, just write that she is difficult. My mother said. Put in her file that she is hard to work with. Say she has loyalty issues. Just make sure that if anyone calls for a reference, they hesitate. That is all I'm asking. It is for her own good. Simone stopped the recording. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a lung. I looked at my mother. She was staring at the table, her face burning red. She couldn't look at me. For her own good. I repeated, my voice flat. You destroyed my reputation for my own good. We were protecting you, Mark blurted out, slamming his hand on the table. You don't know what it is like out there. We wanted you home. Simone didn't let the argument breathe. She clicked the remote again. Exhibit B, she said. Surveillance footage from Rivengate Bank. Dated January 14th. The video played. It showed Lauren at the counter, laughing with the teller. It showed her sliding the loan application across the marble surface. It showed the stamp coming down. Simone paused the video on a close-up of the document. The signature line was zoomed in. Natalie Elaine Allen. The bank has confirmed that Ms. Allen was not present. Simone said, they also confirmed that the loan officer, a Ms. Sarah Jenkins, bypassed the biometric identity check because the applicant claimed to have a family power of attorney. Simone looked at Lauren. There is no power of attorney. Lauren, that is a fabrication. And in the state of New York, signing a financial instrument in another person's name without legal authorization is forgery in the second degree. It carries a prison sentence of up to 7 years. Lauren turned gray. She gripped the arms of her chair. I was going to pay it back. She stammered. It was just a bridge loan. I needed the capital for the rebrand. Natalie always helps me. She wouldn't send her own sister to jail. I stared at her. She wasn't sorry she did it. She was sorry she got caught. Simone moved to the third slide. It was an email log from Lumen Core. Exhibit C, she said. This is the timeline of Natalie's resignation. The screen showed 2 dates. October 12th. Natalie Allen refuses to alter data. October 14th. Northbridge Legacy. Trust transfers $5,000 labeled Special Assistance to the Mark Keene branch account. October 16th. Natalie Allen's employment file is updated to Do Not Rehire. Walter leaned forward. His voice was a low rumble. I authorized that transfer. He said, Mark called me. He told me that he had a medical emergency. He said he needed $5,000 for a procedure that insurance wouldn't cover. My father shrank in his seat. I did not know. Walter continued, his eyes boring into his son, that the procedure was a bribe to a middle manager to destroy my granddaughter's career. I looked at the screen. The pieces fell into place. My father had taken money from his estranged father, money he swore he never touched, and used it to pay off my boss. They had literally purchased my unemployment. Denise looked up. She looked at Mark with horror. "You told me that money came from your bonus," she said to him. "You told me you handled it. And you told me," Mark shot back, "that if Natalie moved away, we would lose the free childcare for Lauren. You said we had to keep her here." I listened to them turn on each other. It was pathetic. It was revealing. Denise slumped in her chair. She looked at Lauren. "You knew," she whispered. "Lauren, you knew about the loan. You told me Natalie agreed to it. You told me she co-signed it to help the family. I did what I had to do." Lauren screamed, standing up. "Why is everyone attacking me? I am the one trying to build a business. I am the one with dreams. Natalie just sits in front of a computer all day. She has plenty of credit. Why can't she share it? Sit down." The security guard near the door said. He didn't move, but his voice made Lauren drop back into her chair instantly. Walter looked at his son. "I thought you left this family because you wanted independence." "Mark," Walter said, "but you didn't want independence. You just wanted to be a parasite on a different host. You traded a father with rules for a daughter with a conscience, and then you bled her dry." "Dad," Mark stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "Dad, please, I thought you didn't want to be involved. I thought you cut us off." "I don't want to be involved with liars," Walter said coldly, "but I have been watching. I have been reading the reports. I watched Natalie apply for job after job. I watched her drive that rusted car while you played golf. I watched her pay for your groceries while you took vacations." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "That girl has more dignity in her little finger than you have in your entire body." Simone turned off the screen. The room went quiet again. The evidence was hanging in the air like smoke. There was no more denying it. No more gaslighting. No more, "We are just a loving family." They were a syndicate, and I was the mark. Simone placed her hands on the table. "The presentation of evidence is concluded," she said. "The facts are established. Natalie Allen has been systematically sabotaged, defrauded, and financially abused by the Mark Keene branch beneficiaries." She looked at me. "Ms. Allen, you have the floor." I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my spine felt made of steel. I looked at them. My mother, weeping into a tissue. My father, unable to meet my eyes. My sister, seething with the indignation of a spoiled child who had finally been told no. They looked waiting. They were waiting for me to yell. They were waiting for me to cry. They were waiting for the emotional outburst that would allow them to say, "Oh, she is just hysterical," and then smooth things over. But I didn't yell. Hormone levels, heart rate, bank balances. I was a data analyst. I dealt in facts. "Today is not the day I ask you for money," I said quietly. I picked up the blue folder Simone had given me. "Today is the day I decide if you are allowed to touch your own money ever again." Denise looked up, her eyes wide and red. "Natalie," she asked, her voice trembling, "what does that mean?" "It means," I said, opening the folder to the freeze order, "that the interview is over, and you didn't get the job." The air in the boardroom was so thick with tension it felt like walking through water. The evidence of their betrayal, the forged loan, the sabotaged career, the 47-minute phone call hung over the table like a toxic cloud. My mother was weeping into a tissue, a sound that usually triggered a reflex in me to fix whatever was wrong. My father was staring at the polished mahogany table as if he wished it would open up and swallow him. Lauren was vibrating with a mix of fear and indignation, her eyes darting between Simone and the door. They were waiting for the hammer to drop. They were waiting for me to sign the executive order that Simone had placed in front of me, the one that would cut the financial artery they had been bleeding for 15 years. But I could not sign it yet. Not until I dealt with the collateral damage. "Before we discuss the freeze," I said, my voice cutting through the sound of my mother's sniffling, "I want to talk about the girls." Lauren's head snapped up. "What about them?" she asked, her voice defensive. "They are downstairs with the nanny. They are fine. They were not fine. They were pawns. They were innocent civilians being dragged onto a battlefield by a mother who saw them as leverage and a grandmother who saw them as anchors to keep me in port. "Simone," I said, turning to the lawyer, "please bring out the second document." Simone nodded. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thinner file. It was bound in soft white linen, a stark contrast to the heavy blue and black folders that covered the rest of the table. She slid it across to me, and then she slid a copy to Lauren. "This is the Monroe Nieces Opportunity Fund," Simone announced. Lauren looked at the cover, confused. "What is this?" "It is a trust vehicle," Simone explained. "It is separate from the Mark Keene branch. It is separate from the main Northbridge estate. It is a sealed, inviolable fund designed exclusively for the benefit of your daughters." Lauren reached for it, but Walter spoke up from the head of the table. "Read the terms." "Lauren," he said, "do not just look at the potential dollar signs. Read the mechanics." Simone walked us through it. "This fund covers 100% of all educational expenses, from private kindergarten through graduate school," Simone said. "It covers all medical and dental costs, including orthodontics and therapy. It covers extracurricular activities, summer camps, and music lessons." I watched Lauren's face. For a split second, I saw relief. She was calculating how much money this would free up in her monthly budget. She was thinking about how much cash she would have left over if she didn't have to pay for swimming lessons or tuition. But Simone was not done. However, Simone continued, her voice sharpening. "The disbursement structure is strict. No funds are ever transferred to the parents." Lauren frowned. "What the trust pays the vendors directly," Simone said. "If the girls need braces, the check goes to the orthodontist. If they go to a private school, the wire transfer goes to the school's bursar. If they need clothes, they are issued a restricted debit card that works only at approved children's retailers." Simone paused, looking directly at my sister. "Not a single cent passes through your personal accounts. Lauren, you cannot leverage this money. You cannot borrow against it. You cannot skim off the top to pay for a studio renovation or a vacation." Lauren slammed the folder shut. "You are trying to cut me out of my own children's lives," she shouted. "This is insulting. You are acting like I am some kind of thief." Walter didn't blink. "You are a thief." "Lauren, we just watched a video of you forging your sister's signature to steal $80,000. Do not pretend that your moral compass points north." Lauren stood up, her face red. "You are trying to steal my kids," she accused, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You want to buy them? You think because you have his ear now, you can just take over. I am their mother. I am not trying to steal them." "Lauren," I said calmly. "Then why this?" she screamed. "Why set it up so I can't touch the money?" "Because I know you," I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. I took a breath, forcing myself to lower the volume. I needed to be the adult in the room. "I know you," I repeated quietly. "I know that last month, you pulled the girls out of gymnastics because you said it was too expensive, but 3 days later you bought a $1,200 laser peeling machine for the studio. That was a business investment," Lauren argued. "It was supposed to pay for the gymnastics later, but it didn't." I said, "It never does. You gamble with their present to pay for your future, and you always lose." Lauren looked around the room, seeking an ally. She looked at Mom, but Denise was staring at the white folder with a strange expression. She looked at Dad, but he was still studying the grain of the wood table. "Simone," I said, "show them the text." Simone picked up the remote again. The screen on the wall changed. It displayed a screenshot of a text conversation between Lauren and Denise. The timestamp was from yesterday morning, 10 minutes after Lauren had sent me the Zillow estimate of my apartment. "Lauren, I am packing the bags. Should I bring the girls? It is a long flight." "Denise, yes. Bring them. Bring the iPad so they stay quiet in the lobby." "Lauren, good idea. Natalie won't say no if the girls are watching. She is too soft. We can use them to guilt her into signing the cosign agreement." The silence in the room was different this time. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of shame. I looked at the screen. I read those words again. She won't say no if the girls are watching. It wasn't a guess. It was a strategy. They had weaponized my love. They knew that I would set myself on fire before I let those little girls feel the cold. I remembered a Tuesday last winter. Lauren had called me, frantic. She had a networking opportunity with a potential investor for the studio. She needed me to watch the kids. I had a deadline for a project at Lumencore, a massive data migration that was due the next morning. I told her I couldn't. She had put my oldest niece on the phone. "Auntie Nat, Mommy says you are too busy to see us," the little voice had said. "Are you mad at us?" I had canceled my evening. I had driven over. I sat on Lauren's couch with my laptop, working until 4 a.m. while the girls slept in the next room, just so Lauren could go out and drink overpriced cocktails with people who never invested a dime in her business. I had thought I was being a good aunt. I thought I was being the village that it takes to raise a child. But looking at the text message on the screen, I realized I wasn't the village. I was the leverage. I looked at Lauren. She was refusing to look at the screen. "You brought them here as shields," I said. "You dragged 2 little girls across the country, disrupted their schedule, and sat them in a lobby with iPads, just so you could use their faces to force me to sell my home." "It wasn't like that," Lauren muttered. "It was exactly like that," Walter said. His voice was low and dangerous. "It is kidnapping for profit." "No," Lauren shouted. "I love my kids. I know you love them." I said, "I believe that. But you love your dream of being a CEO more, and you are willing to tax their childhood to pay for it." I placed my hand on the white folder. "I am doing this because I refuse to let them grow up learning the lesson you taught me." I said. "What lesson?" Lauren spat. "That love is a transaction." I said, "That family is only there to be used, that you are only valuable if you are providing a service." I looked at Simone. "I have a question." I said, "Yes." "Ms. Allen, if I execute the freeze on the Mark Keene branch," I said, pointing to the blue folder, "if I cut off the parents completely, does the Monroe Nieces Opportunity Fund still activate?" Simone nodded. "Yes, it is an independent clause. In fact, it is designed to activate specifically when the main branch is compromised. It is a lifeboat. Even if the parents' ship sinks, the children's trust floats. So," I said, looking at Lauren, "even if you have $0 in your bank account tomorrow, the girls still go to school. They still see the doctor. They still get new shoes." "Yes," Simone confirmed. I looked at my mother. Denise was weeping again, but this time, she wasn't covering her face. She was looking at the text message on the screen. She was looking at her own words. "Bring them. She won't say no." I saw something break in her face. It was the fragile porcelain mask of the sacrificing mother she had worn for 30 years. It cracked, and underneath, I saw a tired, frightened old woman who realized she had become the villain of her own story. "Natalie," Denise whispered. I looked at her. "If you do this," Denise asked, her voice trembling, "if you sign that paper, the girls will be safe." "Yes, Mom," I said. "They will be safer than they have ever been. They will never have to worry that their tuition money was spent on a marketing campaign. They will never have to hear their mother crying about rent." Denise nodded slowly. She wiped her eyes with a crumpled tissue. Then, she trailed off. She looked at Lauren, who was fuming. "Lauren, be quiet." Lauren blinked, stunned. "Mom, your sister is right," Denise said. Her voice was weak, but it was steady. "We did use them. We did, Mom." Lauren gasped. "Whose side are you on?" "I am on their side," Denise said, pointing to the door where the guard stood. "The girls. We dragged them here. Lauren, we used them. Look at that text. It is ugly. We look ugly." This was the first time in my entire life that my mother had sided against the family narrative. It was a small crack, a tiny fissure in the wall of denial. But light was shining through it. I turned back to Walter. He was watching me. He wasn't looking at the papers. He was looking at my face. He was waiting to see if I had the resolve. He needed to know that my mercy for the children wasn't weakness. He needed to know that I could separate the innocent from the guilty. I picked up the pen. "I am activating the Monroe Nieces Opportunity Fund," I said clearly. I signed the white document. The scratch of the pen against the paper was loud in the quiet room. I closed the folder and handed it to Simone. "Effective immediately," I asked. "Effective immediately," Simone said, placing it in her briefcase. "The school has already been contacted. The accounts are live." Lauren sat down heavily. She looked defeated, not because she had lost money, but because she had lost her ammunition. She couldn't threaten me with the girls suffering anymore. If she cried poverty, I could point to the fund. If she said the girls were starving, I would know she was lying because the debit card was reloadable. I had disarmed her. I looked at my family. They were smaller now, without the children to hide behind. They were just 3 adults who had made bad choices and expected me to pay the bill. Walter tapped his cane on the floor. A single, sharp sound. "You have done well. Natalie," he said, "you have secured the next generation. You have ensured that the sins of the father and the mother and the aunt do not fall on the children." He leaned forward, his blue eyes locking onto mine. "But now, we must deal with the present generation. The children are safe. The hostages are free." He gestured to the blue folder, the freeze order. "Now you have a clear shot," Walter said brutally. "No human shields. Just you, and the people who sold your career for $5,000. I put my hand on the blue folder. It felt cold. My father, Mark, looked at the folder. He looked at me. For the first time, he didn't look entitled. He looked terrified. "Natalie," he said, his voice hoarse, "please, we can work this out. You don't have to do the other part. You saved the kids. That is enough, isn't it?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had let me believe he was poor while he cashed a check every month. I looked at the man who had let me think I was a failure because I couldn't find a job. Knowing he was the one locking the doors. "No, Dad," I said, "it is not enough." I turned to Simone. "I did this for the girls." I said, my voice steady. "I did this so they grow up knowing that money isn't the only thing that connects people. I want them to know that love is what you give, not what you extract." I paused. "But to teach them that lesson, I have to teach you one first." I opened the blue folder. Denise gasped. Lauren covered her mouth. "You can't," Lauren whispered. "You can't just cut us off. We will die." "You won't die," I said. "You will just have to live like I have been living for the last year. You will have to live like everyone else." I looked at Walter. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. It was a nod of respect. I had passed the test. I had protected the innocent before I punished the guilty. I had shown that I wasn't doing this out of cruelty, but out of justice. I picked up the pen again. "The rescue mission is over." I said to the room, "Now, the audit begins." The white folder containing the future of my nieces had been whisked away by Simone, sealed and safe in her briefcase. The girls were protected. The human shields were gone. Now, only the blue folder remained on the mahogany table. It sat there, open to the final page. The header was printed in bold, capital letters that seemed to shout in the quiet room, Executive Order 7C Alpha. Indefinite asset freeze and disbursement suspension. Simone reached into her jacket pocket and produced a second document, placing it next to the blue folder. Then she took the heavy black metal fountain pen Walter had given me earlier and set it down precisely between the 2 papers. The pen gleamed under the recessed lighting of the boardroom. It looked less like a writing instrument and more like a surgical tool, or perhaps a detonator. "These are the final instruments," Simone said, her voice devoid of emotion. Cutting through the heavy atmosphere like a knife, she pointed to the document on the left. "This is the freeze order for the Mark Keene branch," she explained. "It terminates all discretionary funding immediately. The monthly stipend of $12,500 stops today. The credit cards issued to Mark and Denise Keene are deactivated. The automatic transfers to Glow Loft Studio are canceled. The payments for country club dues, luxury vehicle leases, and non-essential travel are voided." She pointed to the document on the right. "This is the liquidation warning," she continued. "It notifies the beneficiaries, your parents and sister, that any debts currently held by the trust in their names will be called in within 90 days unless they assume personal liability." The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the hard drive in the server rack in the corner. Then, the explosion happened. It started with a low, strangled sound from Lauren, and then she erupted. She lunged forward, her hands slamming onto the table, rattling the water glasses. "You cannot do this," she screamed. Her face was twisted, ugly with panic. "You are destroying this family." The words hit me like a physical slap. I had heard those words before. I had heard them when I wanted to go to a college 3 hours away instead of the local state school. "You are destroying this family." I had heard them when I refused to co-sign a car lease 5 years ago. "You are destroying this family." It was their favorite refrain. Any attempt I made to build a boundary was interpreted as an act of demolition. I looked at my sister. She wasn't crying for her children anymore. The fund I had just signed ensured they would be fed and educated. She was crying for herself. She was crying for the lifestyle she felt entitled to, the one she had built on a foundation of sand and my credit score. "You are doing this out of spite," Lauren yelled, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "You are jealous. You have always been jealous because Mom and Dad liked me better. Because I had dreams and you were just... You." I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I let her words wash over me like dirty water. Denise was next. She didn't scream. She went for the knees. She reached across the table, her fingers scrabbling for my hand, her eyes wide and wet. "Natalie, please," she begged. Her voice was a high, thin whine that I knew better than my own name. "Just listen to me. We made mistakes. Okay, we made mistakes. But you cannot leave us with nothing. How will we live? How will we pay the mortgage?" I pulled my hand back, resting it on the arm of my chair. "You have equity in the house. Mom," I said calmly, "you can refinance, or you can sell it and downsize. You have options. You just don't have my money anymore." "Just this one time," Denise pleaded, clasping her hands together in a prayer gesture. "Just give us a grace period. 6 months, please, baby. I promise. After this, everything will be different. We will change. I swear to you, we will change." I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes. But I also saw the calculation. She was running the same script she had run 1,000 times. "I promise I will pay you back next week. I promise this is the last favor I ask. I promise we will appreciate you more." It was a lie. It had always been a lie. They wouldn't change because they didn't have to. As long as the check cleared, as long as I fixed the printer, as long as I absorbed the shock, they would stay exactly the same. I turned to look at my father. Mark was sitting perfectly still. He was staring at the grain of the wood on the table. He hadn't said a word since Walter had dressed him down. He was shrinking, folding in on himself. He was the embodiment of the path of least resistance. It had been easier to take the money from his father and lie about it than to get a job. It had been easier to let his wife sabotage my career than to stand up to her. It had been easier to let me drown in debt than to admit he had a life raft he wasn't sharing. "Dad," I said. He didn't look up. He just shook his head slightly, a gesture of surrender. He was leaving it to me. He was forcing me to be the executioner so that later, he could tell himself he was just a victim of circumstances. He was putting the weight on my shoulders, just like he always did. I looked back at the pen. The black metal barrel seemed to pulse with potential energy. I realized in that moment that I was standing at a crossroads that would define the rest of my life. If I did not sign this paper, I would be the hero for exactly 24 hours. They would hug me. They would order dinner. They would tell me I was the best daughter, the best sister. And then, next month, the request would come. Just a little loan. "Nat, just a cosign. Just fix this." If I did not sign, I was accepting my role as the eternal resource. I was agreeing to be the battery they drained to keep their lights on. But if I signed, I would be the villain. I would be the cold, ungrateful daughter who abandoned her aging parents. I would be the bitter sister who ruined the visionary entrepreneur. They would tell this story to everyone who would listen. They would paint me as a monster. I looked at the spreadsheet in the open file. I saw the row for the date of my 37th rejection. I remembered that day. I had sat in my car in the parking lot of a generic office park, crying so hard I couldn't breathe. I had called home, needing comfort. Lauren had answered. She hadn't asked how the interview went. She had asked if I could pick up her dry cleaning on my way back because it was on my route. I remembered the nights I stayed up until 3 in the morning writing business proposals for Glowloft, doing the market research Lauren refused to do, only for her to take the credit and then complain that the formatting was wrong. I remembered my 30th birthday. I had sent an email to the family group chat, inviting them to a small dinner at my apartment. I had cooked for 2 days. No one came. Mark had a golf tournament. Denise had a migraine. Lauren said she forgot to check her calendar. They had left me alone with a lasagna and a birthday cake I had bought for myself. And the next day, they hadn't apologized. They had asked me to help them set up their new iPhones. The anger that rose in me then wasn't hot. It was cold. It was crystalline. It was the absolute zero of a heart that had finally realized it was beating for the wrong people. I reached out and picked up the pen. The metal was cold against my skin. It was heavy, substantial. It felt like a tool meant for building or for breaking. Today, it was both. Simone, I said, yes. Ms. Allen, I want to add a clause. I said, a verbal addendum to the freeze order. Can we do that? Simone nodded, pulling out a notepad. It will be recorded in the minutes and become binding. What is the condition? I looked at my family. Lauren had stopped screaming and was watching me with wide, terrified eyes. Denise was holding her breath. I am not doing this to punish you because you are poor, I said, my voice steady and clear in the large room. Being poor is not a crime. I have been poor for the last year because of you. I leaned forward. I am stopping the rescue because you have turned me into mandatory insurance. You think you don't have to be careful, or kind, or hardworking. Because if you crash, Natalie will pay the deductible. Natalie will handle the premiums. I gripped the pen tighter. So here is the condition. I said to Simone, the freeze on the discretionary funds is indefinite. However, the board, meaning me, will review a petition to reinstate partial funding after a period of no less than 2 years. 2 years? Lauren gasped. 2 years is forever. 2 years, I repeated, and during those 2 years, the Mark Keene branch beneficiaries must demonstrate complete financial self-reliance. No loans, no overdrafts, no calls to the trust, no calls to me. I looked at my father. You have to get jobs. I said, real ones. You have to pay your own bills. You have to budget. If you can survive for 2 years without bleeding anyone else dry, then we can talk about unlocking the trust again. This isn't revenge, I said, looking at my mother. This is rehab. You are addicted to other people's money. And I am cutting off the supply. You can't do this, Denise whispered, her face pale. You are our daughter. I said, and that is why I have to do it, because no one else loves you enough to tell you the truth. I looked down at the paper, Executive Order 7C Alpha. The dotted line waited for me. I felt my heart beating in my chest. It was a strong, steady rhythm, thump, 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 thump. It was the sound of a survivor. It was the sound of the woman who had walked into 38 interview rooms and never stopped trying. I wasn't their victim. I wasn't their servant. I wasn't their bank. I looked at Walter Monroe at the end of the table. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes were bright. He was watching a new legacy be born. I looked at the paper. I choose me. I said softly. I lowered the pen. The nib touched the paper. The black ink flowed. I signed my name, Natalie Elaine Allen. I didn't scrawl it. I didn't rush. I wrote every letter with precision and care. I underlined it. I lifted the pen. It was done. The sound of the pen hitting the table as I set it down was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It sounded like a lock clicking shut, or maybe like a door finally opening. I sat back in my chair. I watched Simone pick up the paper. She checked the signature. She stamped it with a red seal. Order executed. Simone said, "The accounts are frozen." My phone buzzed in my pocket. Then Lauren's phone buzzed. Then my father's. then my mother's. A cacophony of notifications filled the room. Lauren grabbed her phone. She stared at the screen. Alert, your ending balance is negative. Automatic payment to Glow Loft. Rent failed. She looked up at me, her eyes full of shock. It was real. The wall was real. She had finally hit it. Denise looked at her phone. Alert, credit card ending in 4021 has been suspended by the issuer. Mark didn't even look at his phone. He just closed his eyes. I watched them process the new reality. I watched the panic set in. The realization that the safety net was gone and they were in free fall. But I didn't feel guilty. For the first time in 10 years, the crushing weight on my chest was gone. I could breathe. I could breathe deep, clean, cold air. I looked at the glass wall of the conference room. I saw my reflection. I didn't look like the tired, desperate girl who had walked into Vexton Ridge this morning. I looked like someone who owned her own life. I had fired my family, and now I was finally free to hire myself. After signing the freeze order, I did not put the pen down. I reached for the second document, the white folder containing the Monroe Nieces Opportunity Fund. This time, my hand did not tremble. I did not pause to look at my mother's tear-streaked face or my sister's stunned expression. I signed my name quickly, efficiently, the ink flowing smooth and dark. I was securing the safety of two little girls who deserved better than to be used as bargaining chips. I closed the folder and pushed both documents across the table to Simone. Simone stacked them neatly, tapped the edges on the table to align them, and slid them into her leather briefcase. The snap of the briefcase latch locking sounded like a gavel striking a block. Effective immediately. Simone said, her voice was dry, professional, and final. The universe responded instantly. My mother's phone, which was sitting face up on the table, lit up with a harsh blue light. It buzzed once, then twice. Notification, transaction declined. Recurring transfer to Glow Loft Studio failed. Insufficient authorization. Notification card ending in 4021 declined at Azure Day Spa. Please contact your financial institution. Denise stared at the screen. The color drained from her face until she looked like a ghost. It was happening. The invisible cord that had connected her to an endless supply of money had just been severed. Lauren let out a scream that tore through the room. "You witch!" she shrieked, jumping to her feet. "You spiteful, jealous witch! It is all your fault. You are ruining everything because you are miserable." She lunged toward the table, but the security guard took one step forward. He didn't touch her. He just occupied the space, a wall of muscle that made her freeze. Lauren looked around the room, desperate for an audience. She looked at Walter, who was ignoring her. She looked at Simone, who was checking her watch. She looked at Mark, who had his head in his hands. Her scream echoed off the glass walls and died. There was no applause. There was no sympathy. The theater where she had played the victim for 30 years was closed, and the audience had gone home. She was just a woman shouting in a soundproof room. Walter Monroe stood up. He adjusted his cuffs slowly. He did not look at his son. He did not look at the daughter-in-law who had sold his granddaughter out for $5,000. He walked around the table until he was standing in front of me. He looked down at me, his blue eyes searching my face. "Do you regret it?" he asked. It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of the world. Did I regret hurting them? Did I regret burning the bridge? I looked at the pen lying on the table. I regret that I did not have this pen 10 years ago. I said quietly, I regret the decade I spent trying to buy love that was never for sale. But right now, I looked him in the eye. No, I do not regret a thing. Walter nodded. A barely perceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Good," he said. He gestured to Simone. She stepped forward and handed me a thin, cream-colored envelope. It wasn't a legal document. It was a letter. I opened it. The Vexton Ridge logo was embossed at the top. Offer of employment. Position Director of Ethical Risk and Data Integrity. I scanned the description. It wasn't a pity job. It was a mandate. My role would be to design internal systems to prevent data manipulation, to create firewalls against the kind of abuse I had suffered at Lumencore, to audit projects for ethical compliance. I am not giving you money. Natalie, Walter said, his voice stern. I do not believe in handouts. I am giving you work. I looked at the salary. It was significant. It was fair. But more importantly, I looked at the clauses Simone had highlighted. Authority to refuse any personnel referrals from external stakeholders. Independent audit authority over all legacy client accounts. I looked up at Walter. This means I can stop people like my old boss. I realized it means I can stop people like my mother from making those phone calls. It means you can turn your scars into a shield for others. Walter said, that is the only revenge that lasts. Success and protection. I held the letter. It felt heavy, but good. It felt like a weapon I actually knew how to use. I accept, I said. I placed the letter on the table, next to the pen. But I have one condition, I added. Walter raised an eyebrow. Name it. No jobs for them, I said, gesturing to my family. No soft landings. No consultant roles for Lauren. No board seats for Mark. They have to make it on their own, Walter smiled. Agreed, he said. The trust is closed to them. The company is closed to them. They are civilians now. Simone nodded, making a quick note in her ledger. I stood up. My legs felt steady. The trembling was gone. I picked up my purse. I didn't pick up the blue folder or the white folder. Those were Simone's burden now. I looked at my family one last time. Lauren was sobbing quietly, her face buried in her arms on the table. Denise was staring at her phone, swiping frantically as if she could delete the notifications and bring the money back. Mark was just sitting there, a man who had realized too late that his apathy had a price tag. They looked small. They looked like strangers. I placed the black metal pen back in the center of the table. It clattered softly against the wood. I cleared my throat. They looked up. After today, I said, my voice calm and clear in the glass room. If any of you want to see me, you are welcome to call. Denise's face lit up with a flicker of hope. Natalie. But, I continued, cutting her off, you will start the conversation with the sentence, I respect your time. You will not start it with a dollar amount. You will not start it with a guilt trip. And if you ask me for money, even for a parking meter, I will hang up and I will not answer for another year. I didn't wait for them to answer. I didn't wait for the promises or the accusations. I turned around and walked toward the door. The security guard stepped aside. I walked out of the boardroom. Behind me, the heavy glass door slid shut with a soft, pneumatic whoosh. It sealed the sound inside. I could see Lauren's mouth opening in a scream. I could see Denise reaching out, but I couldn't hear them. They were silent actors in a silent movie I was no longer watching. I walked down the long, gray hallway. My heels clicked on the floor. Click, click, click. It was the same sound Walter's shoes had made when he walked into the interview room. It was the sound of authority. I pressed the button for the elevator. It arrived instantly with a gentle ping. I stepped inside. The doors began to close. I caught my reflection in the polished steel of the elevator walls. For a year, when I looked in the mirror, I had seen a failure. I had seen the girl who was rejected 38 times. I had seen the walking wallet, the safety net, the disappointment. But as the doors slid shut, sealing me in the quiet safety of the elevator, I didn't see that girl anymore. I saw the temporary trustee. I saw the director of ethical risk. I saw the woman who had picked up a pen and rewritten her own ending. I had fired my family, and for the first time in my life, I had hired myself. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below and let's chat. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.